Once again, welcome to IGCSE 0460, where we look at geography for Cambridge. Today we are going to continue with our topic development, and we will be looking at the segment of inequalities within countries. In the previous lesson, we looked at inequalities in development between countries, where we said that countries are at different stages of development, and according to UN, some countries are in stage 1, which is least developing countries, while others are in stage 2, which is developing countries, and the other countries are in stage 3, which is the newly industrialized countries, or NICs, and then the most developed countries belong to stage 4, which is developed countries. Now we want to focus on a single country and look at the level of development between its regions. Using China as our example, we can see from this map that GDP per person is quite different in different provinces of China, and that tells us that also inequalities in development may occur within a country. Now from the map, we can see that provinces in the west are poorer than the provinces in the east, according to the key which shows the GDP per person in 1,000. So we will focus on this a bit later. Now we want to understand why there could be inequalities in development within a country. And in order to understand this, we will use the concept of core and periphery. But before we go any further, let us understand the difference between core and periphery. So core are the urban regions, while the periphery are the rural regions. I am sure every person understands the difference. Now from the core areas, we have the transfer of finished goods, and then from the peripheral areas, we have the transfer of labor and raw materials and sometimes capital to the core regions. So what is the difference in characteristics between these two places? Core regions have advancement in technology, and they also have better education services, meaning that majority of the people there are educated. They also have better salaries, which are earned from manufacturing industries, and then better infrastructures. On the other hand, peripheral areas have poor education services, meaning that majority of the people may not have attained high levels of education. They also have poor technology and poor infrastructures. Jobs are very few, and people earn very low salaries, and the rate of production is also very low. So if you're asked a question to give some of the characteristics of these areas, there you go. So let us understand this core and periphery using the cumulative causation model. We will start with a graph which shows time on the horizontal axis and per capita income on the vertical axis. It also shows two areas, A and B, which are almost at the same level of development in terms of per capita income during the pre-industrial period. So place A could be having some advantages such as mineral resources, and maybe it could be strategically located. So what is going to happen over time is that industries may establish in place A and becomes the core. You can see from the graph that the red line shows the core, and you can see that there is an increase in per capita income. Of course, this comes with the establishment of industries. Now, also labor, capital, and raw materials are taken from the place B, and it becomes the periphery. You can see the green line shows now the periphery area, because it is losing people, it is losing capital, and a lot of resources are being transferred to the core to help in the manufacturing industries. And of course, Over time, the manufactured goods from the core are sold to the periphery, and this outcompetes the goods that could be manufactured from the peripheral area. And what is going to happen is that these two places are going to be growing far apart in terms of per capita income. And this is what we call a period of rapid economic development. But development is only happening in one area, and that is the area that is becoming the core. As time goes by, the demand for raw materials from the periphery is going to stimulate growth, because remember, the raw materials are being taken from the periphery to the core. So as these resources or raw materials are being sold, there is some growth that starts to take place in the periphery area. You can see on the other side of the dotted line that the green line also starts to go up. And then also the selling of the manufactured goods in the periphery is going to stimulate trade. Probably some people will set up some shops, and this means that the development is now going to be converging. So these regions will no longer be so much different in terms of development. So eventually, our centers of self-sustained economic growth may develop in the periphery. Of course, this is as a result of the sale of raw materials and also the trade, which comes as a result of many manufactured goods coming in. So if this process is strong enough and significant, economic growth may occur in the periphery, and the inequality between the two areas, like I said, will begin to narrow, and we call this economic convergence. So this is finally what happens, that the red area is the core and the green one shows the periphery, but you can see that both are starting to develop almost in the same way. So many developing countries are in the first stage of cumulative causation model, because the wealth gap between the core and the periphery is still widening. So this is what happens. So basically what this means is that we could use this model also to understand the differences in development between the developed countries and the developing countries. In this case, the developed countries would be called the core areas, and the developing countries would be the peripheral areas. But when we come back to a single country and look at the differences in the level of development between the regions, then we see that within the developing countries, the peripheral areas or the rural areas are more poor, while the urban areas may be more rich. Those are the core regions. So we say we are still, for the developing countries, are still in the first stage of the cumulative causation model. Back to this map of China, we can see that provinces such as Beijing, you can see Beijing right there. We can see others like Tianjin. We can see Shanghai right there, Guangdong. These are more developed than some of the regions in the west, such as Tibet, Sichuan, we have Zhejiang, and others. So these are poorly developed because according to their level of GDP per capita, they are very, very low. So this confirms that inequalities actually take place within a single country. So we want to go ahead and see what causes inequalities between regions within the same country. So number one, in some areas, industries have closed. So this means that areas where industries are still in operational, these people have jobs, they earn more, and they are able to live better qualities of life, compared to areas where industries have closed and people are living in poor state because they don't have enough money to earn a living. And in the next photograph, you can see the differences in areas of residence, where on this side, these rural areas, and on this side we have people are walking on the streets of New York. This is the Intercontinental Hotel. So what this means that people who live in rural areas have low incomes due to limited investments. Majority of people are employed in agriculture, and therefore the quality of life could be very poor compared to urban dwellers who receive high incomes and enjoy better standards of living. On this side, we have another factor. Some ethnic groups are discriminated against. What this means is that some ethnic minorities are not given equal opportunities such as education, government roles, investments, infrastructures, and therefore they are left behind in terms of development in their areas. In Uganda, for example, the Karamojong people are the least developed, where they have poor education, poor health care, and they have less access to food. So you can see these are the Karamojong people, and in the background you can see the kind of houses they are living in. So they are basically very poor people, and their regions are not well developed. And in this other point, we have employment structures. I can see the differences. This lady on this side is working on the farm, you can see, and this is the difference with someone in the office working a tertiary or quaternary job. So what does this mean? That this employment structure actually refers to the proportion of people employed in different sectors. So in areas where a majority of people are employed in the primary sector, we have less development as people earn less and cannot afford basic needs of life. On the other hand, of course, people with people live high quality lives in areas where they are employed in secondary, tertiary, or even quaternary sectors. And of course, we have differences in the levels of education, where we can imagine that highly educated people normally access better paying jobs, and they earn high salaries, and they also normally maintain smaller families, which allow them to save enough money, and therefore they can enjoy better standards of living. Uneducated people, on the other hand, they work in the informal sector and therefore earn very little money, and they normally have large families, so many children, and therefore they will always live poor quality of life. Our next point is land ownership. You can see this is the title of land ownership. So we have areas where people own land privately, and they have the capacity to develop this land, do different projects, and develop themselves. But those people where land is maybe owned by the community or by the government, they cannot be able to make decisions to do private development, and therefore they remain poor and they cannot enjoy better standards of living. We have an exercise or an assignment here from the past paper, and you can see from this map that level of development are different within this country that is being represented, or within this region. So let's read the question. Study figure 5.2, which shows variation in the Human Development Index in different parts of Argentina. So this is part of southern part of South America, showing the country of Argentina, and it has different HDIs in the different regions. So question number 1 is using figure 5.2 only, describe the variation in HDI within Argentina. And lastly, explain why there are inequalities in development within countries. Thank you for joining me. Please do this exercise and submit for marking. Subscribe if you have not. Catch you in the next lesson.